The grandfather clock in the corner of the mahogany-paneled study struck 3:47 p.m. as Harold Whitmore clutched his chest and collapsed onto the Persian rug. At 73, the retired pharmaceutical executive had spent months watching his family from the shadows of his sprawling Connecticut estate, growing increasingly bitter about their transparent motivations. "Help!" he gasped, his voice echoing through the marble hallways of the 12-bedroom mansion. "Someone, help me!" The October afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room filled with awards, photographs, and reminders of a life built on shrewd business decisions. Harold's breathing was labored, not from any actual medical emergency, but from the emotional weight of what he was about to discover about the people he'd spent decades providing for. Within 30 seconds, footsteps thundered down the main staircase. His eldest son, Marcus, appeared first, his expensive Italian shoes skidding on the polished floor as he rounded the corner into the study. "Dad, what happened?" Marcus knelt beside him, his face flushed with what appeared to be genuine concern. At 45, Marcus had inherited his father's sharp features, but lacked the steel that had built the Whitmore fortune. His hands hovered uncertainly over Harold's prone form. "My chest, can't breathe properly," Harold wheezed, studying his son's expression carefully. Behind the worry, he caught something else, a quick glance toward the massive safe hidden behind the oil painting of Harold's late wife, Eleanor. "Should I call 911? Marcus asked, but his tone carried an odd hesitation, as if he were calculating the implications. Before Harold could respond, his daughter Victoria burst into the room, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. At 42, she maintained the polished appearance of a woman who lunched at country clubs and chaired charity galas more for social status than genuine philanthropy. "What's going on? Marcus, why didn't you call an ambulance immediately?" She pulled out her iPhone with manicured fingers, but instead of dialing emergency services, she seemed to freeze, staring at the screen. "I was just about to," Marcus replied defensively. "Maybe we should see if it passes first. Dad's had these episodes before." Harold felt a chill that had nothing to do with his performance. These episodes? He'd never had heart problems in his life. His regular checkups with Dr. Patterson consistently showed the cardiovascular health of a man 20 years younger. "Where's your brother?" Victoria asked, glancing around nervously. As if summoned, David, the youngest at 38, appeared in the doorway. Unlike his siblings, David had always been the dreamer of the family, the one who wanted to write novels instead of manage investments, who'd married for love rather than social advancement. Harold had always hoped David might be different. "What happened to Grandpa?" David asked, though something in his voice seemed rehearsed. "Heart attack, we think," Victoria said quickly. "Marcus found him." David approached slowly, his eyes not on his father's face but scanning the room, the open checkbook on the desk, the documents scattered from Harold's afternoon of reviewing his will. "Maybe we should call his lawyer first," David suggested quietly. "Before the paramedics. You know how these things can get complicated with the press if word gets out about his condition." Harold's blood ran cold. Even David, sweet, artistic David, who had always seemed above the family's materialistic concerns, was thinking about damage control and inheritance implications before his father's health. The three siblings stood around him, none moving to call for help, each lost in their own calculations. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock and Harold's deliberately labored breathing. It was then that Maria Santos appeared in the doorway. At 55, Maria had worked for the Whitmore family for nearly 15 years. Ever since emigrating from El Salvador with her teenage daughter, she cleaned their mansion, organized their social events, and often worked 16-hour days to ensure everything ran smoothly. Her English, while heavily accented, was clear and direct. "Mr. Harold," she pushed past the three siblings without ceremony, dropping to her knees beside him. Her weathered hands, strong from years of manual labor, gently checked his pulse at his wrist and neck. "Que pasó? What happened?" "Heart attack," Marcus said dismissively. "We're handling it, Maria." Maria ignored him completely, her full attention on Harold. "Mr. Harold, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you understand." Harold squeezed weakly, noting how her calloused palm felt warm and genuinely concerned against his skin. "I call ambulance now," she said firmly, already reaching for her old flip phone. "Wait," Victoria interjected. "Maybe we should think about this first. Dad values his privacy." Maria stopped dialing and looked up at Victoria with an expression Harold had never seen before, pure disgust mixed with disbelief. "Your papa is sick, maybe dying. You think about privacy." Her voice carried the righteous anger of someone who had witnessed something unforgivable. "I call ambulance now." She dialed 911 with swift, determined fingers. 911? Yes, I need ambulance. Heart attack. Old man, 73 years, 47 Elm Ridge Road, Westport. She gave the address clearly, then provided additional details about Harold's symptoms and condition. While Maria spoke with the dispatcher, Harold watched his children. Marcus was pacing near the window, already on his phone with someone, probably his investment advisor. Victoria had stepped into the hallway, and he could hear her hushed conversation about managing the situation and controlling the narrative. David sat heavily in the leather armchair, staring at his hands. Only Maria remained focused on Harold. After ending the call, she grabbed a pillow from the sofa and carefully positioned it under his head. She found a throw blanket and covered him, checking his pulse again. "Ambulance come in 5 minutes," she said softly. "You stay calm, Mr. Harold. Maria is here." As sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, Harold closed his eyes and felt something break inside his chest. Not his heart, but his faith in the family he'd worked so hard to provide for. The only person who had truly cared about his well-being was the woman they barely acknowledged, whose presence they took for granted, whose devotion they had never truly valued. The ambulance was pulling into the circular driveway, and soon this performance would end. But Harold knew that the real revelation was just beginning. Word count: 400 words. Tentar novamente. Befaça o bloco 2, com 1100 palavras no idioma inglês editar. Chapter 2. The Revelation. The emergency room at Westport General Hospital buzzed with its usual Tuesday afternoon chaos. Harold Whitmore lay on the narrow gurney in examination room 3, electrodes attached to his chest, while Dr. Jennifer Martinez reviewed his test results with a puzzled expression. The EKG readings showed the steady rhythm of a perfectly healthy heart. "Mr. Whitmore, I have to say these results are quite remarkable for someone who supposedly just suffered a cardiac episode," Dr. Martinez said, adjusting her stethoscope. "Your heart rate, blood pressure, and oxygen levels are all within normal ranges. Have you been experiencing any chest pain, shortness of breath, or dizziness recently?" Harold shifted uncomfortably on the hospital bed, the thin gown doing little to ward off the sterile chill of the room. Through the partially open door, he could see his 3 children in the waiting area, each absorbed in their phones rather than showing concern for his condition. "Doctor, I think I may have overreacted," Harold said carefully. "Perhaps it was just anxiety. I've been under a lot of stress lately with family matters." Dr. Martinez nodded understandingly. "Panic attacks can certainly mimic heart attack symptoms. The chest tightness, difficulty breathing. It's quite common, especially in older adults dealing with significant life changes or family stress." From the corner of the room, Maria Santos looked up from the plastic chair where she'd been quietly waiting. She had insisted on riding in the ambulance, despite Marcus's protests that the help didn't need to accompany them to the hospital. Her dark eyes studied Harold's face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Mr. Harold," Maria said softly, "you tell Doctor the truth now. What really happened today?" Harold felt heat creep up his neck. There was something in Maria's tone, not accusatory but knowing. After 15 years of cleaning his home, organizing his life, and observing his family dynamics, Maria had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the undercurrents in the Whitmore household. "I told the truth," Harold replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Dr. Martinez glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Well, regardless of the cause, I'd like to keep you for observation for a few hours. At your age, it's better to be cautious." As Dr. Martinez left to update his family, Maria moved her chair closer to Harold's bedside. The afternoon sun streaming through the hospital window highlighted the premature lines around her eyes, evidence of years spent worrying about everyone except herself. 15 years I work for your family," Maria said quietly, her accent more pronounced when she was emotional. 15 years I watch you, Mr. Harold. I know when you are sick, when you are angry, when you are sad. Today you were not sick." Harold's throat tightened. "Maria, I don't know what you test them," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You test your children to see who really care about you. And now you know." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Harold stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in an attempt to avoid Maria's penetrating gaze. "In my country," Maria continued, "we have saying, la sangre no siempre es más espesa que el agua cuando el agua ha sido más dulce. Blood is not always thicker than water when the water has been sweeter." Harold turned to look at her, surprised by the profound sadness in her expression. Your children, they think about money first, Papa second. But Mr. Harold, this not their fault completely. You teach them this. What do you mean? Harold asked, though he suspected he already knew. Maria pulled her chair even closer, her voice dropping to ensure privacy. You remember when Marcus was 12, he broke your golf trophy. What you do? Harold winced at the memory. I made him work extra chores to pay for a replacement. And when Victoria want to go to art school, but you say business school better for family company. I was trying to prepare her for the real world, Harold said defensively. And David, when he write that beautiful story for school contest, win first place. What you say? Harold closed his eyes. I told him writing wouldn't pay the bills. Maria nodded sadly. You teach them that love is conditional, that your approval come only when they do what make money, what make family look good. So now they think your love is about what they can inherit, not who they are. The truth of her words hit Harold like a physical blow. For decades, he had prided himself on raising successful, ambitious children. He had provided them with the best schools, the finest opportunities, the connections they needed to thrive in business and society. But he had also created a transactional relationship where affection was earned through achievement and loyalty was measured in profit margins. But you, Harold said, looking at Maria with new understanding, you stayed with me today because when my daughter Sophia was sick with pneumonia 8 years ago, you drive us to hospital at 3 in the morning. You wait with me for 6 hours. You pay doctor bills when my insurance not cover everything. Maria's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You never asked me to pay back. You never mention it again. You just help. Harold remembered that night vividly. Sophia had been burning with fever, and Maria had been terrified. He had acted on instinct, driven by human compassion rather than calculation. And when immigration officers come to house 2 years ago, you tell them I am like family, that you need me, that I am good person who deserve to stay in America. Harold nodded, recalling how he had spent considerable time and money ensuring Maria's legal status was secure. So, when I see you on floor today, I think about all the times you help me when I have no one else. I think about how you remember my birthday every year, how you ask about Sophia's school, how you never make me feel small or invisible. Maria wiped her eyes with a tissue from the bedside table. That is love, Mr. Harold. Real love. Not because I work for you, but because you see me as human being. Outside in the waiting area, Harold could hear Victoria on the phone with someone, discussing the potential impact on family investments if word of his health scare became public. Marcus was speaking with David about power of attorney documents. What I do now, Maria? Harold asked, feeling older than his 73 years. Maria smiled gently, placing her weathered hand over his. Now you teach them different lesson. You show them what real family look like. Word count. Mimbia 100 words. Tentar novamente. P. Faça. O bloco 3. Com 1800 palavras no idioma inglês editar. Chapter 3. The Awakening. 3 days after the hospital incident, Harold Whitmore sat in his study, the same room where he had orchestrated his fake heart attack. The late October morning was crisp, with golden leaves swirling outside the tall windows of his Connecticut estate. He had spent the previous nights lying awake, Maria's words echoing in his mind like a persistent echo he couldn't shake. The house felt different now, not quieter but somehow emptier, despite the usual sounds of his children moving through their daily routines. Marcus had taken up temporary residence in the guest wing, ostensibly to keep an eye on Dad's recovery, though Harold noticed his eldest son spent most of his time on conference calls about expanding his hedge fund. Victoria had extended her stay as well, claiming concern for his health, while simultaneously planning a charity gala that would enhance her social standing in Westport's elite circles. Only David seemed genuinely affected by the experience, though Harold couldn't tell if it was concern or guilt driving his youngest son's hovering presence. A soft knock interrupted Harold's brooding. Maria entered carrying a tray with his morning coffee and the newspaper, just as she had every day for the past 15 years. "Buenos dias, Mr. Harold," she said, setting the tray on his desk with practiced efficiency. "You sleep better last night?" "A little," Harold replied, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested otherwise. "Maria, sit down, please." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the unusual request. In all their years together, their interactions had maintained the traditional boundaries of employer and employee, despite the genuine respect Harold felt for her. "I'm not supposed to sit in your office, Mr. Harold. Mrs. Victoria, she not like when I—" "Victoria doesn't run this house," Harold said firmly. "I do, and I'm asking you to sit." Maria perched on the edge of the leather chair across from his desk, her posture straight and alert. Harold studied her weathered hands, thinking of all the work they had done in service to his family, cleaning, organizing, caring for a household that barely acknowledged her presence beyond her utility. "I've been thinking about what you said at the hospital," Harold began, "about how I taught my children to view love as transactional." Maria nodded but remained silent, her dark eyes watching him with that uncanny ability to read his emotions. "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone," Harold continued, his voice dropping. "When Eleanor was dying, my wife, in those last months, she said something to me that I've tried to forget." Harold's gaze drifted to the oil painting of his late wife hanging above the fireplace. Eleanor had been gone for 8 years, but her presence still lingered in every corner of the house. "She said I was raising our children to be successful, but not to be human. She was worried they would grow up thinking achievement was more important than compassion, that success was measured only in dollars and social status. Mrs. Eleanor, she was a very wise woman," Maria said softly. "She always treated me with kindness. She asked about my family, remember my daughter's name." "She did," Harold agreed, feeling a familiar pang of loss. "And she was right about the children. I dismissed her concerns then, thought she was being overly sentimental because of her illness. But watching them the other day, seeing how they reacted to what they thought was my heart attack," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The memory was still too raw, too disappointing. "Mr. Harold," Maria said gently, "is not too late to change." Before Harold could respond, voices in the hallway interrupted them. Marcus was speaking loudly to someone on his phone, his tone sharp with frustration. "I don't care what the quarterly projections show," Marcus was saying as he passed the study. "If the old man's health is deteriorating, we need to move faster on the merger. I can't have family drama affecting our investor confidence." Harold's jaw clenched. Even now, 3 days after the fake heart attack, Marcus was treating his father's supposed medical crisis as a business obstacle to be managed rather than a family tragedy to be grieved. Maria noticed Harold's expression and leaned forward slightly. "You want to know something, Mr. Harold? Your children, they not bad people. They confused people. Confused. They think money will make them happy because that what you show them. They think your love come with conditions because that how you give it to them. But inside they still little children who want Papa to be proud of them for who they are, not what they achieve." Harold considered this, remembering moments from his children's youth that he had forgotten or dismissed. Marcus at age 10, proudly showing him a drawing he had made of their family, only to be told that art was a waste of time. Victoria at 15, wanting to volunteer at a homeless shelter, being redirected to internships that would look better on college applications. David at 8, writing a story about a magical friendship, being told that successful people dealt in facts, not fantasies. "I robbed them of their childhood wonder," Harold said, the realization hitting him with unexpected force. "But you can give it back," Maria replied. "Different way, but still possible." "How?" Maria smiled, the first genuine smile Harold had seen from her since the hospital. "You start with truth. You tell them about test you do. You tell them why you do it. You tell them what you learn." "They'll be furious," Harold said, though the idea both terrified and appealed to him. "Yes, probably, but fury is better than indifference. Fury means they still care about something real." A commotion in the foyer interrupted their conversation. Victoria's voice, raised in obvious irritation, carried into the study. "What do you mean she's eating in the dining room?" Victoria was saying. "The help doesn't eat in the dining room, David. That's completely inappropriate." "Her name is Maria," David's voice replied, surprisingly firm. "And Dad asked her to join him for lunch yesterday. Since when do we dictate where our father eats his meals, or who he eats them with?" "Since he had a heart attack and might not be thinking clearly," Victoria shot back. "We need to maintain some standards in this house." Harold stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Maria looked at him with concern. "Mr. Harold, you stay calm. Your blood pressure?" "My blood pressure is fine," Harold said grimly. "It's my family that's sick." He walked toward the door, Maria following close behind. In the foyer, he found Victoria facing off against David, while Marcus watched from the staircase with detached amusement. "Having a family meeting without me?" Harold asked, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded boardrooms and built business empires. All 3 of his children turned to face him, their expressions shifting from argument to guilty concern. "Dad," Victoria said quickly, We were just discussing household arrangements while you're recovering. I see, Harold replied coldly. And what arrangements did you decide regarding Maria? The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the grandfather clock's steady ticking and the October wind rattling the windows. Harold looked at each of his children in turn, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in decades. I think it's time we had a real conversation. Word count, 100 words. Tentar novamente. P faza o bloco 4, com 1100 palabras, no idioma inglés. Editar, Chapter 4. The Choice. The Whitmore family gathered in the formal living room as the November rain drummed against the tall windows. Harold had requested this meeting, and for the first time in years, all three of his children sat without their phones, sensing the gravity of the moment. Maria stood by the doorway, having been specifically asked to remain despite Victoria's obvious discomfort. Harold walked slowly to the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture his children recognized from countless childhood lectures about responsibility and success. But this time, something in his demeanor was different, less commanding, more vulnerable. 3 weeks ago, I collapsed in my study and called for help, Harold began, his voice steady but quiet. You all responded quickly, and I want you to know that I noticed each of your reactions very carefully. Marcus shifted in his chair, his expensive suit rustling. Dad, if this is about calling 911 faster, I was just assessing the situation. I wasn't having a heart attack, Harold interrupted, the words falling like stones into still water. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand froze halfway to her pearl necklace. David's face drained of color. Only Marcus managed to speak. What do you mean you weren't having a heart attack? Harold walked to the mantelpiece, where family photos spanning decades created a timeline of birthdays, graduations, and achievements. I faked it. I wanted to see who would genuinely care about my well-being versus who would see it as an inconvenience or opportunity. You what? Victoria's voice rose to a pitch that could have shattered crystal. You put us through that trauma, had us rush to the hospital, worried sick about losing you, and it was all an act. Were you worried sick? Harold asked quietly, turning to face his daughter. Because what I saw was you calculating PR damage and inheritance implications before anyone called for medical help. Victoria's face flushed crimson. That's not. I was just trying to protect the family reputation. That's what you taught us to do. Yes, Harold said sadly. It is what I taught you, and that's my greatest failure as a father. David finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Dad, why would you do something so cruel? Harold looked at his youngest son, remembering the sensitive boy who used to write stories about friendship and adventure. Because I needed to know if I had raised children who loved me, or business partners who saw me as a valuable asset. Of course we love you. Marcus stood abruptly, his face a mixture of anger and hurt. How can you even question that? Do you? Harold asked. Marcus, when was the last time you called me just to talk, not to discuss investments or business opportunities? When did you last ask about my day, my thoughts, my feelings about anything other than money? Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, his confident demeanor cracking. Harold turned to Victoria. And you, sweetheart, when you visit, how much time do you spend with me versus networking with my wealthy neighbors and planning events that boost your social status? Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained defiant. I've worked hard to maintain this family's standing in the community. Someone has to care about our reputation. Our reputation, Harold repeated. Not our relationships, not our happiness, our reputation. He moved to David, his expression softening slightly. And David, my dreamer, you gave up writing, gave up the things that brought you joy, to work in a job you hate because you thought it would earn my approval. When did I ever tell you that your happiness mattered less than your bank account? David's shoulders sagged. You didn't have to say it, Dad. Every time I brought you a story I'd written, you'd ask when I was going to get serious about my career. Every time I talked about something I was passionate about, you'd redirect the conversation to practical matters. Harold felt the weight of decades of misdirected parenting crushing down on him. You're right. All of you are right to be angry with me. I created this dysfunction. I taught you that love was conditional, that my approval depended on your achievements rather than your character. He walked to where Maria stood by the doorway and gently took her arm, guiding her into the center of the room despite her obvious reluctance. This woman, Harold said, his voice breaking slightly, has worked for our family for 15 years. She earns a fraction of what any of you make in a year. She sends most of her salary to support her elderly mother in El Salvador and is putting her daughter through college. And when I collapsed, fake collapse though it was, she was the only person in this house who cared more about my life than my assets. Maria looked uncomfortable being the center of attention, but Harold continued. Maria didn't hesitate to call 911. She didn't consider the family reputation or worry about inheritance taxes. She knelt beside me, checked my pulse, covered me with a blanket, and stayed by my side because she genuinely cared whether I lived or died. Not because of what I could give her, but because she saw me as a human being worth saving. Victoria wiped her eyes with a tissue, her voice small. Dad, that's not fair. We do care about you. I know you do, Harold said gently. But somewhere along the way I taught you to care about the wrong things first. I made you believe that success and social status were more important than compassion and connection. He walked to the window, watching the rain create rivulets down the glass. Your mother tried to warn me about this before she died. She said I was raising you to be successful, but not to be human. I thought she was being overly sentimental. I was wrong. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Harold remembered from his son's childhood when he was struggling with difficult emotions. So what happens now, Dad? Where do we go from here? Where? Harold turned back to his family, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time, not as extensions of his legacy or representations of his success, but as individuals carrying the wounds he had inflicted through years of conditional love. Now, we learn to be a real family, Harold said. If you're willing, it won't be easy. We'll need to have honest conversations about things we've avoided for years. We'll need to forgive each other, me for teaching you the wrong values, and you for letting those values define your relationships. He looked at Maria, who had been quietly witnessing this family reckoning. And we start by acknowledging the people who have shown us what genuine care looks like, even when we didn't deserve it. David stood up, his eyes red with unshed tears. Dad, I'm angry about the fake heart attack. But I'm angrier about all the years I spent trying to be someone I'm not to earn your love. I know, son, and I'm sorry. Victoria joined David, her voice shaky. I want to try, Dad. I want to learn how to care about the right things. Marcus remained seated, his jaw tight with emotion. This is going to be hard, really hard. I don't even know who I am outside of work and money. Harold smiled sadly. Neither do I, Marcus. Maybe we can figure it out together. As the November rain continued to fall outside, the Whitmore family took their first tentative steps toward healing wounds that had festered for decades. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but for the first time in years, Harold felt hope that they might become the family Eleanor had always dreamed they could be, and Maria, who had unknowingly become the catalyst for this transformation, smiled quietly from her place among them, no longer the invisible help, but a cherished member of a family learning to love without conditions.